Alright, we'll begin in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and hello everybody, and welcome to the whatever episode of Panzer in the Works with yours truly, Panzer Bros, and
Me, Historic Hippos.
joining me yet again with an interesting one we'll gather by the title of Jojo's Bizarre Adventure Part 1 and Part 2. Part 1 being Phantom Blood and Part 2 being Battle Tendency. These were based off manga originally made in the 80s, although the anime was put into one season released between 2012 and 2013. These together, I would class these as pre-Stan Jojo, so in other words, before, of course, before like Part 3 and Part 4, which is, well, especially with Part 3 being incredibly more popular, but these are the ones which would eventually build onto them. If you're not sure what means by Jojo or whatever, it's a bloodline of the Joestar family, and well, it's Joe for the last one, and then Joe for the first one. Just every single of their names has Joe in it, as in J-O, not like E or any of it. And well, as given by the title Bizarre Adventure, each one is incredibly bizarre, with each one following a different generation with a different Joestar going through history really, in different places, and each one it can be vastly different from the last.
Though I think describing them as bizarre might be an understatement.
They are, yeah, it's incredibly, yeah, it's because especially each one it does completely different things, and it's I'm not sure how to describe it, but each one it's got a really weird past. Of like one part maybe put something completely random in, was like, whoa, where does that come from? But then it might make sense for some reason. But yeah, bizarre is definitely an understatement in terms of what goes on in each season really. For this one, we'll only be focusing on season one, which is part one and part two. I think first of all, go into the characters. We'll start with part one because in part one and part two, there's only one character which is between them, but of course you have the main Jojo of the time, Jonathan Joestar, which I'm not sure how to describe him, but he's a son of a nobleman, and from what I managed to gather from definitely his design, it's based off like Fist of the North Star. That's kind of where his design came from.
Oh yeah, like in the opening when you see him in his like outfit, then that yeah, you pretty much get like this is the North Star.
Yeah, it's well, of course, yeah. I've said before, it is the product of its time, being originally done in the late 80s when all this action stuff was definitely going around. But
And speaking of 80s, everyone has fabulous hair in the like 1880s.
oh yeah, the massive, yeah,
Everyone has like mullets.
wacky hairdos and so forth. But yeah, you can tell it's this general trope of guess who the main character is. But here it's okay, guess who is the more unusual main characters and which one which be following on to, and also guess who the Joestar is.
So right, Jonathan Joestar, the first. Well, he's not the first Joestar, but he's like the first notable member of the Joestar family who like pretty much kicks off the entire thing.
Yeah, thanks to everything else
And
comes
it
with
all
that.
began the day some individual named Dio Brando arrived at his mansion.
Yes, with recently after his father being killed, or he found dead, and the father of Jonathan Joestar thought it'd be nice to take him in because the original story, how it goes, it was he thought Jojo's father thought Dio's father was trying to help him in a coach accident or something, but he was trying to loot them, but he thought it was rescuing him, so he thought it'd be a good idea to take on him as an adopted brother of Jonathan Joestar and try and raise him up. But of course, how people remember Part Three, obviously that doesn't happen.
Yeah, shit happens.
Well, he does become a vampire in the end, but that's for how the story goes.
Basically, upon arrival, Dio decides that he's not content with living in a family and decides to like take the Joestar fortune for himself. So he starts being an ass to Jonathan.
Yeah, then many things happen after that. But that's a little bit later on. Other noticeable characters in part one, I'll say, is Zeppelini, which ends up teaching Jojo the ripple, or as everyone calls it, hamon, of the ability of breathing in such a way so you can use water and liquid and whatever, so you can counter vampires and kill them. That's sort of it's like a martial art, but it's magical power kind of into it.
And you can conceivably do whatever you want so long as you can breathe.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I gather from it. And finally, but not least, we ends up going to the part two as well. But Speedwagon, who ends up forming the Speedwagon Company, one of where they got that name from. Uh, Originally, he in part one he's more of a trickster, but in part two he's an older man. But he's
And becomes like the Joestar's like close companion.
yeah, he forms Speedwagon Corporation just because it's partly for research and whatnot, but quite a bit of it is to help the Joestars. That's point of the company which is lead on to in later parts. Any other noticeable characters in part one, apart from the appearance of Jack the Ripper?
There's you got your secondary characters who are like other hamon users who I think were in the same kind of like group that Zeppelin came from.
Yeah,
I forgot the names.
yeah, I've forgotten the names as well, but yeah.
I think Straiza was one of them.
Oh yeah, Strazer, because yeah, he's in part two as well. Yeah. Uh,
Yeah, and oh yeah, in case you were wondering, it seems that almost every character is named after some kind of like musical band, or a musician.
yeah, yeah, like Zeppelini's Zeppelin Speedwagon, that's one. Dio's one. I and there's going to be a lot more later on, especially when you get to the stand era. But that's a topic for another day. But yeah, just every and yeah, that's in part one. There's a lot of characters, but I know most of them seem to be secondary ones. Not a huge amount of them are like proper main characters, although you do have a occasional few which do make a regular appearances, but not hugely important. But they might end up doing something important later on, but they may not. If that makes sense.
Oh, and let's not forget that the whole plot of part one begins by some ancient Aztec stone mask that turns you into a vampire if a single drop of blood lands on
Yeah,
it.
yeah, and that becomes important to part two as well because it's the same mask really they use. But yes, speaking of part two, the characters in part two, you have the grandson of Jonathan Joestar, Joseph Joestar, which can use hamon and he is a trickster, along with his iconic phrase of "Your next line is."
Then you have the descendant of the Zeppelin family who just like before is a companion becomes a companion to Joseph Joestar, Caesar
Yeah,
Zeppelin.
yeah, Caesar, which yeah, I could shout his name like it is, but you have to see that scene. That's a meme in itself, really. That scene, but yeah, he's with his because they both can use Hammond, but they use it in very different ways. But eventually, by by training or whatever, they become a lot better by using Hammond in certain ways. Like they have different styles of how they use it. Like Caesar would use as a bubble of, which is like it is just a bubble really, but it's charged by
Bubble
Hammond.
sharp cut through things, mind you.
Oh yeah, and Joseph Joestar just likes. I don't know, there's like one scene in particular where he uses like a Coke bottle and he ends up using it to shoot out like a speed of a bullet or whatever, like the cap.
Oh yeah, the first thing he's introduced.
Yeah, and a common theme here is quite a few of the Joe stars are very tall. you'll get used to it quickly. Quite a few of them are incredibly tall. Uh, and on
Then you have the villains, who are collectively referred to as the Pillar Men.
yeah, the Pillarmen, because they literally come from stone, and as just and in relation to that, their names are Kars, the leader of it, Wamu, and ACDC. If you
Oh, and there's the fourth one, Santana.
Santana, he appears in like 2 episodes and then is locked away and kind of forgotten about, but in which is never brought up again in any other part. He's just thrown to the side a little bit, but it's a shame. But the point of Santana is it's a weaker version of a Pillar Man, which is just to show, and you shown immediately of just how strong he is. But then you realise, oh, he's pretty much incredibly weak compared to the main villains of Cars, Wamu, and ACDC.
And then like because the part two takes place in the 1930s, you have Nazis.
Oh yeah, with all that you have the Major Strondheim, which originally he's a very patriotic, I'll put it that way, patriotic person to his country, and then he becomes a cyborg, which it's not really a spoiler. It's if you've watched any of the memes towards it or whatever. Yeah, it's a cyborg, and I'm just saying German science is best in the world, or Sekaiichi, as it's pretty much what he says in the sub. But if you're watching the dub, it's just best in the world.
The finest in the world.
Yeah, he says
basically you could just watch the memes and get a brief idea of what Jojo's about.
Yeah, quite a few of it links into it very well, but I know especially here he says it like 4 times in the space of a couple of episodes. One of them was literally just doing the typical salute and just saying the best science is best in the world, while trying to crunch someone's hand in. Another time is one of his eyes becomes a small UV light laser thing, and says it again. The Pillarmen they're weak against sunlight and UV light, just like usual vampires, because they are pretty much more powerful vampires. That's kind of what Pillarmen are. And of course you have the teacher of hamon to Caesar and Jojo, Lisa, which is you can say that?
Yeah.
It's pretty much so Lisa is the mother of Joseph Joestar, which is put into it right at the end, but I kind of gather that if someone's this powerful, they've got to be at least some relation to a Joestar. But yeah, there's quite a few interesting characters throughout the show.
And going back to Stroheim, the plot twist is the Nazis are not the villain.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they kind of, I guess they're kind of secondary villains because they're after the same things that Pillarmen are after.
Yeah.
But all in all, they actually prove to be more helpful to the protagonist than the Pillarmen.
Yeah, so they're kind of more towards the good guys, but we'll forget about when they pretty much killed those couple of dozen Mexicans. We'll forget about that. Apart from that,
yeah, I mean, they're still Nazis.
Yeah,
to quote this one YouTube comment, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Battle Tendency is the only anime that will make you say, "Thank God the Nazis are here."
Yep, especially in a couple of the scenes as well, where they suddenly appear. And it's like, yeah, we're cheering for them. Wait a minute, why am I cheering for these guys? They're supposed to be the bad guys, but they're here. They're the good guys. But hey, at least they're not as evil as these other people. But yeah. But yeah, I don't know if personally, although he can be quite shouty, he's one of my favourite characters, to be honest, Trondheim, just because it's so German. I just find that over the top hilarity, really, which links well into the rest of the show, really.
The whole show is over the top.
The entire show is over the top, yeah. And there is many other interesting characters which I could mention, but I fear we'll be talking about it way too long to try and fit everything in, because there's a lot of good characters. Some of them have 1 or 2 appearances, some of them are like background characters or whatever, some of them a bit more important, but generally these are the main characters which are the proper main characters which appear at least every episode. Yeah, and on to the setting, which differs from part 1 and part 2 in quite a few ways actually. So in part 1 is the 1880s, based in Liverpool. I thought it was London, but no, it's Liverpool apparently.
Oh wait, really? It's not London?
No, apparently it's Liverpool. I had to check this, but I'm surprised no one has a weird accent. But yeah, it's supposed to be towards the outskirts of Liverpool.
Well, if you watch the English dub, I think they actually do give them British accents.
But at least they thought about that. So actually, that's quite nice. But I know
Uh,
it's,
the
it's,
the English dub version of JoJo, they mostly give characters like some kind of accent for parts 1 and 2, but I think for part three they just like just they didn't bother with accents.
yeah. From part 3 onwards, there's a lot more characters than part 1 and part 2. But yeah, it's although I know for Liverpool there's a certain accent for the English language, but yeah, it's although yeah, because our experiences are slightly different since I watched the sub and you watched the dub, so things may have been slightly different, but not too different. But yes, the majority of part 1 is based around. I'm not sure to call it like a mansion or a castle. It's like a fuse between the two at some points, but that's like the main home of the Joestar bloodline for that part. And there's probably some back streets, some whatever like in the city, and there's a ship at the end. But generally, it's, from what I remember, it's mostly around the main mansion or castle or whatever you refer to it. Because some points of it, it's like a mansion. Some points it's got these bits in the top which kind of remind me of a castle in some ways.
And then there are some parts of that mansion or castle that seems to be much bigger than what you would assume, because considering how long the actual action takes, like enough time for the narrator to narrate what's going on.
Yeah. Oh yeah, because there is a narrator which every single part has a narrator just to explain a couple of things, maybe just to go over what's happened before, what's going on now, some description of what this thing is. Sometimes it could be a nice break from the action, which quite a few shows do follow, but here it does work incredibly well, especially for the points where you have no idea what's going on, and it's like, okay, now I understand.
And then once you do understand, there'll be the next part where you no longer understand.
Yeah, it's things can change quite rapidly. So if suddenly one moment things seem relatively normal, okay, it's fine. Like for part 1, okay, it seems relatively simple. It's more of a horror thing, okay, it's fine. And then suddenly pulls out a mask, becomes an incredibly vampire, which I actually find the vampires for this version better in a way than sometimes how vampires are perceived in other media. Here they've got the special flash freeze ability, which as soon as it touches someone, it would freeze that part of the body. Like it just turns to ice.
Basically, vampires in the JoJo universe are not your stereotypical Vlad Dracula thing, sucking blood, living in mansions, wearing big capes that make them look like bats. No, in JoJo, they're immortal people who can survive being decapitated and have ice powers.
Yeah, and their only weaknesses are sunlight and UV. Hence, going on to part 2, they actually use UV weapons against them, which in turn goes against them when Cars uses the mask on himself with the red stone, in which actually powers it up more. But yes, onto part 2 for the setting. It's not just set in one location, unlike part 1. It's a lot more of an adventure, I have to say. A lot more of a. It's of course, yeah, based in the 30s, as we said, but it goes from New York for the first episode to introduce Joseph Joestar. Then it would go to Mexico to show the Pillar Men, and of course the first parts of like Strondheim and rest of the Nazis, and introducing them. And then it would move on to Rome with the awakening of the Pillar Men, which is probably one of the more famous parts of part 2, really. that, them actually awakening, and also the music as well. Then it will go quickly on to Venice with the training on court. It's not. It's kind of like a training montage, but it's a bit longer.
Yeah, pretty much.
It's and then eventually they move on to Switzerland, which is where we find Time as a cyborg for the first time, and most of the action goes on from there. And then in the final part, they end up in a volcano somehow. So in other words, they go across the entirety of Italy. They end up going from north to south really within the flight at the end, but I'm not going to question it. It's Jojo.
Well, I would be more questioning of how a volcanic eruption can send a small piece of land, close up to like low orbit.
I think it ends up going quite high for some reason, like building up pressure or something, and then Joseph Joestar kicks him for the last bit or whatever, and then he freezes. But Kaz is technically still alive, but as it said, he stopped thinking, so he's just endlessly floating around, wishing he wasn't immortal because he can't, because we weren't able to do anything, just endlessly floating in space for the rest of the time. But yes, as I mentioned a small parts before of the actual story itself, which, of course, it follows in the generations of each Joestar, but this is the point of, especially for the first part, is just to introduce what it means to pretty much be a Joestar and the weird and wacky things they end up getting into, and the problems the family has and whatever. For part one, especially, we've mentioned Dio is adopted as Jonathan Joestar is adopted and becomes his adopted brother, and tries to torment him to try and make to become the heir of the fortune of the, I don't know how much money it is, but it seems quite a lot.
Even going so far as to steal the first kiss from Jonathan's love interest.
Yep, and that became a meme in itself. Was it Cano Dioda? I think.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, close enough, but yeah, that's where that's come from. There's even in part one where the to be continued with the roundabout. That's where that comes from as well. If the people who
Right. The first two parts. Yeah. At the end of episodes, they have like the to be continued at the bottom, and then they always have like roundabout, the song roundabout by the band Yes play in the as the end credits.
And well, that's become incredibly popular. Although, if you say to people where it's from, no one really knows where it is. But here's where it's from, and well, couldn't get it from a better place, and it works every single episode. Don't know how they managed.
Yeah, it makes it really it makes quite a first impression. Something that I feel like part three doesn't have as much because they replaced the end credits, the ending song.
Yeah, and they replaced that to a good old 80s song, but it's done well here. And although it ends, sometimes when it goes towards the end of the episode, you can start hearing the music, and it's like, oh, I know, guarantee it's going to be a to be continued at some point in the next 30 seconds, and it happens. It doesn't matter how many times I watch it, it's still brilliant. But yes, honestly, you can follow the story, because the story in each bizarre adventure, really, each story within each part is it's well thought through, but you don't have to follow it really closely. You can not take in everything, but you can still incredibly enjoy it, which sometimes I accidentally did, but I didn't have to go back because I didn't actually miss a huge amount. It's weird in terms of some points maybe quite major, but overall you don't miss any enjoyment, say if you miss a pass or whatever, because each part is independent of each other, which I found quite nice.
You mean each part is kind of like
It's like
like enclosed story, like not
yeah.
it works well on their own in a vacuum.
Yeah, it's each story, each part is its own. Well, it's its own generation. Each part is its own story. You can watch you can watch part two without watching part one, which was what I did originally. But then actually went back to part one and actually watch it. because I knew part two. I knew if we go through part two, you can still understand what's going on, even though if you haven't watched part one. But it gives a little bit of information what happened in part one, so you're not completely confused, but you can happily watch through random parts and you're not missing anything. Although in later parts, like in part six, you will have to know previous information to go onto it. Yeah, it's I know so some points it's been really good, but yeah, and also of course the stone mask which appears midway through part one, which is actually a major plot point which goes into part two as well, especially with a certain red stone which joins onto it, so you can. But the normal mask can turn you into a vampire, as we said before. But with the red stone, it will help you turn into the ultimate being, which is what happens in part two, with cars using it and can pretty much do anything.
And the heroes having to like scramble for how to stop him.
Yeah. So if you, although there was actually an interesting theory, which was not a wacky theory or anything, but it's an interesting little detail where. Remember that scene where you've got cars is like his hair is like waving and like the sun in the background rising, so I've conquered the sun. Remember that scene?
I think so.
Well, there was no wind, but yet his hair is waving like there's a decent strong gust. So the idea is he's creating his own wind, so he can make it seem dramatic. Yeah, this is the kind of things he ended into, and then yeah, so he can do anything really. So his arms become wings, and then the feathers come off it. They turn into little piranhas or whatever, which end up eating away this seaplane. He can survive lava by constantly replicating his skin, constantly forming new skin.
And his hand can transform into a squirrel, a cannibalistic squirrel, but a squirrel nonetheless.
Oh yeah, there's that way, and he goes right through. Showtime, remember that he can go right. He can just go right through people's chests, goes right through, just if nothing was there, which makes it an interesting event when it happens, when it just pretty much kills all these Nazi soldiers just going right through and no one can do anything about it.
And it does kind of remind me. I guess this the series is a little known for being a little like cruel towards animals, especially dogs.
Yeah, like doesn't Dio end up killing Joe?
The first thing he does when Dio steps foot into the Joestar estate is to kick Jonathan's dog in the head.
Yeah, that was. Yeah, it's a theme which does occur in later parts as well, but.
And then he cements his dickery by tricking the the Joestar butler into dumping the dog into the furnace.
I'm not sure how do that, but yeah, it's kind of a shame, but they've got to somehow make these people seem evil, and that's an easy way of doing it. So, and of course, everything here is over dramatic, so everything will gonna have to be even more dramatic, and that's an example of it.
Well, there was one part where cars caused a car crash because it was about to run over a white dog that he ignored before.
Oh yeah, I just don't remember that.
Not that it helps. Not that it instills any sympathy into him, but you know.
Yeah, it shows he does care for animals, but not people. No, just despise people. But yeah, there's actually a story behind the Pillarmen as a whole, as in they were actually a relatively large population, especially in this one tribe, but cars ended up pretty much killing them all, apart from when we were in AC/DC. They ended up becoming pretty much the right-hand men, and went into hibernation really for a couple of thousand years, and then reawoke in the 30s, and the events would follow after that. There wasn't a huge amount to their backstory of any major problems or whatever they had with other people, or whatever. But overall, it's done enough to make him seem evil or whatever. But it's not too much to make him seem way too evil, or just to make him not likable in any way. You can still it's still enjoy them being on screen. Like in the scene where Caesar goes up against oh I think yeah Wamu, and when Wamu forms the bubble which has the bandage on it along with the nose ring, Wamu doesn't do anything. He respects pretty much that's his final move. He fought well, so he leaves it. He doesn't destroy it. Doesn't destroy his bubble. It's stuff like that which, yes, they're supposed to be the bad guys, but it just makes them a bit more human, which is what quite a few shows of like a shonen type of show, like major action, is what they kind of fall behind at. But this is what this excels at. Each person feels like a person. They don't feel one-dimensional, or a little bit two-dimensional, but each one is incredibly enjoyable to watch, really, apart from the occasional few. But overall, just by watching the characters interact with one another is brilliant. Say that they've less. Anything else you want to add to that for the story?
No, not really.
Okay, so we can move on to the music, which I did mention before, in terms of the awakening music, which was
The
used.
Pillarman theme.
Yeah, the Pillarman thing, which was for them to be continued thing, my roundabout, which is done by Yes. And what I did forget to mention actually was propaganda used for when every time Strom Time was on, which I actually quite enjoy. It's when you hear the music in the background, you say, yeah, something's going to happen, and yeah, the Nazis appear, which I said before, it's yeah, you're cheering them on, but it's weird to do so. But in part,
And then you have the opening theme songs for each part.
yeah, each part if you actually go through the lyrics, they are directly at the show. They don't work anywhere else. There's certain lines which actually reference parts of the show in terms of the story progression, along with if you actually analyze, which some people have done incredibly well, but actually analyze the openings, there's a lot of detail put into it, which isn't which actually links onto the rest of the show as well. What actually happens, like was it in part two, that opening towards the end, where you have it's very subtle, but not many people notice. But it looks up at the sky and it's like a shooting star which goes past, which you think, oh, that's nice putting it there, but it could actually simplify when Cars ends up going into space, or just before that when Jojo actually puts Caesar's like a bandana thing. It's like, I'm not sure what it's called. I think it's like a bandana thing. Just puts it around his forehead.
Yeah, a headband.
Yeah, the headband thing. Yeah, puts it around his head, then shouts up into the sky. That it pretty much exactly happens towards the end of the show. Trying to
When Caesar dies.
With the giant cross which fell from the ceiling. Yeah, but that pretty much exact thing happens towards the end of the show, which is put into the opening straight away. So you don't realise what they're trying to reference until, oh, that was actually what they were trying to reference in the first place, which is enjoyable how they've done it. And if you go into detail, which some people have done very well, this even references onto later parts as well. But yeah, and I don't know, although most of the rest of the music is for part one, there isn't as memorable music from part one, really. It's just the opening and the ending, really. The rest of the music I didn't hugely pay any attention to, and I don't think many people have either.
I'm more familiar with the music from part two than part one. Like for part one, I just remember the opening theme song and the ending song. Whereas for part two, I at least remember some songs that play in the middle of the episode and not like at the beginning or at the very end.
Yeah, which it's a problem with part one, but It's almost if part one's just to be there, just to, just to lead everything from it. It doesn't. It's not hugely great, but it's not bad. It's good. It's pretty still pretty good, but the next parts are a lot better. It's just there to. This is where it begins. Everything else leads off from that. And yeah, we'll lead on to improvements, which that's as I said just said now. I think that's the only real improvement I can think what they could have done. They they did keep to the loyal to the source material. Pretty much everything is what actually happened in the original manga. They didn't change. They haven't changed much. They've improved some of the drawings because the especially in part one, the drawings were still good, but they weren't hugely great, so they had to adjust it slightly so it would fit better into an animation. But apart from that, the rest of it is loyal to the source, pretty much everything else. And any problems which are with the actual anime would be a problem in the manga, but it's done over 30 years ago, so anything which might seem stereotypical or just it seems like it's done to oblivion or just done a lot. Well, that's just a product of its time. Like how I mentioned before, it was inspired by Fist of the North Star. You can see there's some links to it just because that was a iconic. But that was a it was very iconic and very good at the time. It's just come out, so of course people will be inspired by it. And
As for me, I'm not sure what to improve because I haven't really identified any problems with the first two parts.
yeah, it's
I mean, I'm probably too busy enjoying the show to nitpick stuff, but
yeah. I think that's one good thing about it is that even if there is occasional problem like the fourth pillar man, the Saitana is completely forgotten about within about an episode. It doesn't matter. It's too enjoyable to point out problems with it. It's although there are some small problems with it, it's way outweighed by the great parts of it, the good parts, the characters, the overall story, the settings, the animation of it, the over the dramatic poses. Everything is done really good. And also for the dubbed strong time, I know I'm still iffy on that, especially when it says the iconic, uh, yeah, German engineering is best in the world. I think it could have been slightly better, but overall, I actually kind of enjoyed the dub really as well.
yeah, I mean, in my personal opinion, dub's fine.
Yeah, the dub was fine, which is compared to quite a few shows, the dub is still it's good here, but compared to the rest of the other shows, it is fantastic compared to the quality of everything else. But I know if it depends what you want to watch really, but you can watch the dub and you can watch the sub, and you wouldn't miss out on anything. You wouldn't be disappointed either way. Uh, it's it's just down to personal preference. You can watch both of them. That's what I did recently. I
Well,
did.
I do appreciate how in part two they gave all the Germans a maybe over the top German accent.
Well, it's an over the top show, so it fits in perfectly, which I'm quite happy with. It, the accents, although yes, some of them were way over the top, which is perfectly fine. I'm just glad they put in the accents and they were done very well. And even in the sub where they try and speak, sometimes they try and speak English, but it's like an English which in its own right it is a meme, but it's honestly, even if you watch certain things, if you watch in the sub, you miss from the dub, but some things from the dub you end up missing in the sub. But overall, you won't miss much if you go either way. You still know when an iconic scene happens. You know where it's iconic. Yeah, it's just if you really have the time, just watch both of them. So then you get the entire picture, which was what I did, and I do not regret it at all. Oh yeah,
So yeah, overall, sure. I mean, okay. So here's the thing. Most people when they hear JoJo, they probably think of stuff from part three.
with stands and whatever.
And that kind of puts the first two parts in an odd spot because there's stuff that people don't really associate with what goes on in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure.
Yeah, it's
Especially part one. Like part two has part two is definitely like where it will transition into part of three stuff where people will remember best. But personally, I think like I don't know if it's because part one was the first thing I watched, therefore is like the thing that I remember the least. But I feel like the part one of JoJo is like the least memorable part because like not many stuff that makes JoJo is there.
yeah. I think the purpose of part one. What I personally think is it's to be there. It's still enjoyable, but it's to be there so everything else builds off it. So if you want to know the entire story, here's the entire story, not just forgetting about that. And also, I think it was especially for the original creator, it was slowly building into it because previously didn't have a huge amount of experience before. There was experience of previous manga as well, but this was like their first big project. So, of course, part one wouldn't be hugely great, but it's like just slowly building into it, and each part gradually improving, becoming better. But yes, it's the least memorable, but it doesn't mean it's bad. It's still brilliant.
Yeah.
And of course, by it, you can tell by its name being a bizarre adventure. Throughout each generation, each part is different and great in their own way. It's and I know I said this before, but this time I really mean it. Nothing compares to the show. Nothing. You can compare some Shonen ones, but nothing has the references, the complete over the top, the action, for some reason the part the oh it's like in it's like comics and whatever in the 70s where you have like wham bam or whatever, but here it's like certain poses and menacing and stuff like that. It is just really unusual, which what makes it partly which one of the reasons why it's so enjoyable to watch. It's unusual. It's just great. And if if you watch it, which I highly recommend it. I don't think anyone has really anything bad to say about it. But compare yourself before watching it and after watching it. You will be at least a tiny bit a different person. And that's personally for me anyway. But yeah, as of this very point, which is currently waiting within about a monthish time for part 5 to come out, which I'm looking forward to. But from part but that's Stan Jojo. That's different from these first two parts. So if you want to actually know the full story of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, watch through all of them. Really, although if you kind of want to watch what JoJo is more famous for, really, it's like the action and whatever, then you can miss part 1 out and just go on to part 2 and then go. But if you want the full story, start part 1.
The complete experience. If you want the complete experience, yeah, start from part 1.
Yeah, but you can miss it off and watch it later. You don't miss anything if you go into part 2, even if you go into part 3, really, which is what a lot of people have done. But if you want to know everything, really, as much as possible, like Dio and his history, the Jonathan Joestar, the Joseph Joestar, how the Joestars develop over time and how they change, and how the fact that Hamon is completely forgotten now. I'll class it as the Hamon era of JoJo, and afterwards it's the Stand era. I've just come out of that because here what the stands are used for the more famous parts of JoJo, Hamon takes that role here, just without the figures and whatever. Anything else to add?
No, not really.
Okay, so I think we've pretty much managed to cover everything which I wanted to talk about on my document. And of course, If you haven't watched it, watch it. I've said this before, but really, I do mean it. If I know it's Jojo's Bizarre Adventure is an odd position where it's not too popular, but it's not popular enough. It's that perfect balance. It's not, because you know when something becomes too popular, you get people which end up ruining the fan base for everyone else.
Like Five Nights at Freddy's.
Yeah, just like that. That's when a game becomes too, or show, or whatever, becomes too popular. But here, it's just below that point. So it is still incredibly popular, but it's not to the point where certain fans are going to end up ruining the entire thing for everyone else. So it's in a good position currently right now. But yes, thank you all for watching / I'll say more listening really. It's just a still image in the background. But I have been Panzer Bros.
And I'm Historic Hippos.
And thank you for making it this far. Any suggestions, recommendations are welcome, but please bear this in mind. Me and Historic Hippos have either had to A, watch it, or B, play it, because then we'll both know what we're talking about. And yeah, and also don't forget to join the Discord, then you end up catching up with everything.